Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Bowe. I'm with the Louisiana State Bar Association, and welcome to our Law Talks virtual workshop series. Today's Law Talks is a divorce lawyer's guide to getting married smart, and we have attorney Camille Patti presenting on this important topic. Before we get started, there are a few things that I need to go over. First, this presentation is being live streamed. Questions will be taken at the end, if time permits, and answered live. If you are watching at a library, you may walk up to the computer to ask or to submit your question to the library staff who will submit it for you. If you are watching via Zoom, please use the Q&A, the question and answer section. And if you're watching on Facebook, please submit the question in the comments section. Please do remember that all comments are public and visible during and after this presentation. Finally, please keep your questions general and not case specific. The attorney can only provide information about the law and legal processes, but cannot give advice on individual cases. All right, we do have some disclaimers to read. Please note that the information provided in this presentation does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, all information, content, and materials are for general informational purposes only. No viewer of this video should act or refrain from acting based on information provided in the presentation without first seeking legal advice from counsel in your relevant jurisdiction. If you need assistance finding legal help in Louisiana, please go to the Louisiana Civil Legal Navigator. The link is listed here on this page or on this slide, and we can drop that in the chat later on as well. The LSBA's inclusion of a program is not deemed to be a statement or endorsement of the views expressed therein by the LSBA or any member of the LSBA. Speakers on LSBA programs were carefully selected for their knowledge, but neither the LSBA nor the speaker warrant that the presentation or materials were free of errors or will continue to be accurate. Statements made in these presentations and their materials should be verified before relying on them. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the LSBA, its sections, or its committees. Views expressed are those of the authors and contributors only. And as I mentioned, our presenter today is Camille Patti, attorney at law, who has a lot of experience with divorce matters. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her now.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, I think there's another thing that has my contact information that will be, oh, no, okay. I am Camille Patti. As Stephanie said, I am a divorce attorney. I've been practicing in New Orleans for 6 years. I've owned my practice the entire time, and I've been mostly family law focused the entire time. I also have a master's in sociology, which I think kind of informs my approach in a lot of ways, and it's definitely going to inform, oh, look at, there it is. It's definitely going to inform my advice or not my advice, my legal information in this presentation. So we can do the next slide now. Yeah, and then that's the name of the presentation. We can move on to the next one. Okay. And you can click again. So that is Stanley Kowalski, played by Marlon Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire. And the reason he is the background for this slide is that I think one of the earliest memories I have of discussion of Louisiana property is in this famous line from A Streetcar Named Desire, where he's telling his wife in Louisiana, we have something called the Napoleonic Code. So the fact that Louisiana is based on the French legal system, we have a civil law system in Louisiana, and we are the only civil law jurisdiction in the entire United States. All of the other states are based on common law, which is a system of laws that is derived from court decisions over the year, versus civil law, which is they tried to think of every possible scenario that could happen and write a law for that in advance. It's intended to be very organized, but it's kind of cumbersome and unwieldy. So also, that means that a lot of the times, unless you are looking at specifically Louisiana information that is either by a Louisiana lawyer or a Louisiana firm, and it's talking about pre-nups or how community property works, or even just be extremely wary of any information that you're coming across on your own. And nowadays, there are a lot of legal services that offer you very low flat fees to draft petitions and pleadings, but you get what you pay for in that context. So just as a threshold issue when considering entering into a legal contract in Louisiana, which marriage is a legal contract, you're probably going to want to talk to somebody who is actually licensed to practice law. We also have notary publics in Louisiana, and I'll talk about that more because notary publics are actually allowed to draft some legal documents and can sometimes be an affordable alternative to a lawyer. So I'm going in this presentation to talk about the legal aspects of specifically community property law, which if you are not drafting a premarital contract before you get married in Louisiana, then you are opted into community property law. So I'm going to explain what that means. And then I'm also going to just talk about covenant marriage because it's a very uncommon thing. It doesn't come up a lot. Most people don't sign up for it because, unlike community property law, you have to actually sign up to contract into a covenant marriage. Um, so I'm just going to kind of give you an idea of what that is and why it may or may not be a good fit for you. And then I just am kind of generally going to talk about some other things that, in my experience, this this presentation came out of a discussion I was having with my associate where I was like, I wish people would just have an explanation of all of these things and consider all of these things before they actually got married, because by the time you're to a divorce, it's really kind of too late. Okay, we can do the next slide. Okay, and then why it matters. So I just have to explain my images, and not every slide has an image this time. So if you don't know, this is Carrie Fisher, and this is from her live stage show, which is on HBO. God rest the late great Carrie Fisher. But this chart behind her is explaining her extremely convoluted family where her parents were both remarried multiple times to multiple other people, and just the complexity of her family. So that's very common. Families are complex. I think families have always been complex, but especially after the 1950s when divorce became increasingly common, although it has actually declined, been on a steady decline since the 1980s, which is not a statistic that people actually talk about that much. This is the sociology aspect of the presentation. It's something that's very common. It's still, I think so. In the 60s it was increasing, in the 70s it was increasing all the way up to a certain point in the 80s, and then it's been kind of declining since then. But it's still, the statistic is, I think, on average about 40% of marriages end in a divorce. But those statistics also don't tell the whole story because if a person is divorced once, second marriages are more likely to end divorce than first marriages. And then third marriages are even more likely than second marriages to end in divorce. So the overall statistic takes into account people who are having multiple marriages that end in divorce. So also, while I was kind of looking into this, Louisiana has a relatively low divorce rate if you're looking at it just in terms of um, it's weird because the statistic that they were doing was seven. women per 1,000, which obviously doesn't take into account same-sex male marriages, but also Louisiana has a very low marriage rate, which affects why the divorce rate is so low. But anyway, the reason that this matters is because a lot of people are going to get married, and whether or not you're entering into that marriage with the idea that you're going to be divorced, which I do think happens sometimes, but I would say that the majority of people enter into a marriage believing it's going to last. It is something that could come up. And even if you are together till death does you part, death is still considered the dissolution of a marriage. And so, how you set your marriage up at the beginning is going to affect how your estate is supposed to be administered. Okay, and we can do the next slide. All right, we got this guy, Napoleon. And our code has been revised very many times, and it is huge and cumbersome and unwieldy, but it is the primary source of law in Louisiana. So if it's in the code, it doesn't matter what courts have said, it doesn't matter what revised statutes say. If those things are in conflict, then the code is still the primary source of law in Louisiana. And it establishes community property, which is found commonly in civil law jurisdictions. While Louisiana is the only civil law state in the United States, there are civil law systems around the world. A lot of France, obviously, but also former French colonies are still civil law and still have this tradition of community property. And I kind of like the idea of community property because it's based on this assumption that both parties contribute to a marriage. And even if you have a traditional marriage where one party is working out of the home and one party is staying at home and taking care of the house and raising the children, that person is still contributing to the person outside the home being able to earn and advance their career because they don't have to worry about the things that are going on at home. So that means that everything in Louisiana created during the existence of a marriage through the effort, skill, or industry of either of the spouses is community property. And effort, skill, and industry means your job, essentially. Are you actually putting effort into this? Are you getting a paycheck? Are you getting compensated because you're going out into the world and working? Um, there are common exceptions to that, the primary of which are gifts to one spouse, and also if one spouse receives an inheritance, those are separate property. Anything you had before the marriage is separate property, but it can get complicated in a divorce if you had separate property before the marriage, but you can't really show what you had before the marriage because there's just a presumption that everything in the possession of either of the spouses at the end of the marriage is owned 50-50 by both of those spouses. So we're going to get into later why I think you should take a snapshot of your finances before you get married and just store those documents in a place. Um, and again, community property is relevant to any dissolution of a marriage. So if one spouse dies, then their half of the property, the ownership is split between, it's it, naked owner, which is they have the right to use the property. Okay, let me start over. This is kind of a complicated concept. The surviving spouse gets a lifetime usufruct over their spouse's share of that community property. So, like, if a house was purchased during the marriage and one spouse dies, the dead spouse's property, it's going to be kind of merged together with the ownership of the other 50% until the death or remarriage of the surviving spouse. You got to watch out for the remarriage because the people who get the naked ownership of it are the children of the marriage, which means that once the surviving parent either dies or remarries, the children are actually going to become full owners of the deceased spouse's half of the community. Which is fine if everybody gets along and that's your mom, and you're not going to kick your mom out of her home, and you're not going to start meddling with her ability to use the home in the way that she sees fit. But if dynamics are contentious, then it can start to create problems. Okay, next slide. Oh, okay. So the reason to think about this before marriage is because the time to decide that you do not want to be in a community property relationship is before you get married. Um, Something I see commonly is that people don't mind splitting assets. They sure don't mind splitting debts. They do mind splitting retirement accounts, which is something you should have discussed before you got married. If you want to keep anything separate, you should talk about that before marriage and memorialize it in a matrimonial agreement, which is commonly referred to as a prenup. Because once you are married, Louisiana law makes it a lot harder to opt out of community property. You have to actually get a judge to sign off of it. You can jointly petition the court and say, I do want this. I've had people swear affidavits so that you don't actually have to go and do a hearing in person. But if you are concerned about protecting your assets and you just didn't get around to it before the marriage, that person has no motivation whatsoever to cooperate in opting out of community property. And because the requirements for a post-nup are more onerous than for a prenup, essentially you lost all your leverage. Also, the reason to do it before you get married, do it while you like each other. You are never going to like somebody more than you are when you are about to marry them. And having these discussions with your spouse up front, and this comes into the non-legal aspect of it, actually strengthens a relationship. Have a discussion with them about, hey, I don't think it's fair that you should get a share of my retirement account, or hey, if we think that I'm going to be the one who's staying at home, I kind of think that community property is right for us. Or if community property is not right for us, then there's got to be something built into this contract so that if you leave me 40 years from now, I'm not just going to have signed something saying that I have no right to anything that you created during our marriage. Okay, next slide. All right. I don't know if anybody's seen The War of the Roses or the recent update, but it's the prime example of extremely messy divorce, and it's also an example of, I mean, just these people are nuts. Worst case scenario, but also the thing that they are fighting over is the ownership of the house. Um, so I have a practice where I do uncontested divorces. I love that. They're not messy. When people contact me saying that they want an uncontested divorce, my first question is, okay, do you have any property together? And do you have any children together? Because if you do, my follow-up question is, okay, and have you talked about how that property or debt is going to be divided? And have you reached an agreement on how you guys are going to take care of your kids? It's possible to add on community property partition and custody, and there are ways. I am a licensed mediator. I encourage mediation because it really is a way to help people amicably resolve disputes. Um, but the most likely candidates on their face are the people who are just getting divorced and they don't have any property and they don't have any children because we have a no-fault divorce state. And if you don't have those things, there's nothing to fight about. And then I also listed abuse because that is certainly the rules are very clear on what how a family law matter should be handled if there is particularly physical abuse. Also, severe emotional abuse is certainly something that a court will take into account, but you're not walking clean away clean. There's no way to really contract around that. I mean, I think you could probably put in some clauses into a prenup about if somebody perpetrates violence, like what is that going to look like? But certainly, if there has been any abuse, um, I would say that that is not a marriage that I would think would have a high likelihood of success. And I think there's one more thing that comes up if you click. Okay. And then this last one's down here because it's a little different, but covenant marriage. Um, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay. So, covenant marriage is a way that the Louisiana legislature, I'm pretty sure when you go and you fill out your application for a marriage license, they don't tell you about community property. They don't explain to you what it's going to entail, what the ramifications of the legal contract into which you are entering. But they sure don't allow you to just check a box to opt out of community property, but they sure do have a box where you can opt into a covenant marriage. So a covenant marriage, there, I mean, I haven't seen the statistics. I kind of feel like they're very rare. Because if you're religious and you are opposed to divorce, then I think that that would factor into your marriage regardless. Covenant marriages require premarital counseling sessions. I think that there's a set number. And they also, if you are in a covenant marriage and would like to get divorced, make it extremely difficult to get divorced. There's mandatory marital counseling that I think it's somewhat indefinite. It's kind of written so that you have to continue in that counseling until your judgment of divorce, so like over your 2 year separation period. But I've seen it done other ways where couples can do like one or two, a few sessions, and then the counselor can kind of say this marriage is not savable. Um, and it also requires you have to do a hearing on it. It really causes a lot of delays. Um, and it only has very limited grounds for getting around the 2 year separation period, one of which is if abuse occurs during the marriage. So I personally am not a religious person, so this is not something that would appeal to me. But I think that people should think long and hard about whether or not they want to enter into a covenant marriage, because once they do enter into a covenant marriage, it's really hard to get out of it. And I understand the appeal. Again, I think that the vast majority of people who are getting married are thinking that this is for life. Things happen. There is a reason. I don't necessarily see the fact that 40% of marriages are ending in a divorce um, as a negative thing, because I think that prior to the reform of divorce laws that came about in the 60s and 70s, where states started adopting no-fault divorce statutes, that wasn't necessarily a reflection that everybody was having a happy marriage. It was that people were in very unhappy and very unhealthy marriages and had no option to get out. So you already, if you have children in Louisiana and you're filing a no-fault divorce, you already have to be separated for a year, which is one of the longer separation periods in the United States. I think a year gives to adults a lot of time to really consider whether or not this is something that they want to do. All right, I can move on from covenant marriage. Okay. So I think that there is a conception from media. A lot of the law, there are a lot of portrayals of the law in popular media that are wildly removed from reality. I think the most common conception of a prenup is that there is a rich guy who's protecting himself against gold diggers, which I think that that does happen. I think that there are also kind of built-in protections in the event that somebody is bringing in substantial assets to a marriage because those assets are already considered to be separate property. You would have to keep good records and make sure that you're not commingling with anything that's created during the marriage through your work or anything like that. But income from a trust is already separate property. Um, but certainly there are wealthy people, people with economic disparity who enter into a prenuptial agreement. Uh, and I would say if you are in that scenario and you are the person with the less money, less assets, you should have your own attorney and you should also have your fiance pay for your own attorney. Um, but there are a lot of other scenarios where people a matrimonial agreement is great. It's something that both parties want and feel that's beneficial to both of them. Some common examples I have seen are people are both coming into a marriage with premarital assets. They're roughly equivalent in income, and they say, you know what? I don't ever want to feel like money is coming between us. I make enough money, you make enough money. Let's just keep things separate and let's come up with a way where we're going to jointly pay our expenses and document that and possibly modify co-ownership law in Louisiana to tailor it to our specific situation. I've had older clients who are coming into a marriage later in life who they already have their kids. It's not really a startup marriage. It's one of those marriages where it's a merger. And just for the ease of estate administration, for the ease of their children, they want to just keep things separate so that it's very clear who's going to get what. Um, I would say certainly if one party has significant premarital debt, and that's kind of an indication of how they are with their finances, that's a great reason to have a prenup because not only assets created during a marriage, but liabilities created during a marriage are presumed to be community property. So if this person, I don't know, has a gambling addiction or um, is just really not good with their money and has a business, but like the business is based on lots of loans. It's better if they are just in charge of their thing and you're in charge of your thing so that the IRS and also petitioners, like people in lawsuits, can't come after you for maybe their poor financial decisions. Um, Yeah. So the important thing also with a matrimonial agreement is they're not one size fits all. It's not, I have a template that I start with, but I tell all of my clients that we can tailor this however you want. It's it's kind of like mediation where if you can meet on this term and you can reach this agreement, we can memorialize it in a contract. And there's usually a severability clause so that like in the event one of these agreements is contrary to law, the entire prenup doesn't fall, but just this part of it does. Um, but I've seen, honestly, some of the better prenups I've seen have contemplated really what happens if one of us, by mutual agreement, decides to stay home with a child. How is that going to work? And how are we going to ensure that I'm not being economically penalized for essentially staying home and raising our children. And then again, both parties are encouraged to have an attorney. And I have not ever gotten a premarital contract or reviewed one drafted by a notary, but I do know that that is something that notaries are able to draft in Louisiana. Okay, next slide. Okay. If you're like, I mean, I think I don't have a problem with community property law. I don't have a problem sharing, for better and for worse, what happens during our marriage. It's still a good idea to just make a list of what you have now. If you have things now, if you have substantial assets in a retirement account already, and you have, um, I'm more thinking of the assets, but if you're being honest, you should also record that if you have any debt. Write that down, write your account numbers down, and also just print out your statements as of the month that you are getting married and just scan it into your computer or save it in a folder in a safe place and hold on to it. Because if you want, if you foresee that at any point you would want to say, no, not everything is 50-50. There were some things before our marriage that were just mine alone. You're going to need some documentation, and banks only keep records going back 7 years. So record keeping upfront is the thing that's going to protect you. All right, I can do the next slide. Okay. Yeah, so I got a template from the Bar Association, and one of them was timelines. If you think that you would like to opt out of community property law, or you would like to have more conversations about how community property law works, contact an attorney with as much lead time as possible. I would say the minimum is a month. We have gotten them done in less than a month, but I appreciate not having a timeline breathing down my neck. What is the next slide? I can't recall. Okay, so resources. Um, so I think before I'm going to talk about resources, I haven't really included it, but I just really want to stress, and I think I've kind of brought that up throughout this, that um, it's really important to to have these conversations about not just finances, but how do you envision raising your children? How do you anticipate parenting them? Is one of you going to stay home for a period of time? Is one of you going to be the primary parent? Are you going to have more of a 50-50 split? Who's going to pay for daycare? Is that going to be split? And a conversation about the important things that are going to come up in your marriage. Because, like I said, custody is one of the huge things in a divorce where um, I think that if discussions were had previous to get an idea of what kind of parent the other person anticipates having or being, and um, that can potentially save you down the line. But also, I'm very much aware that things change. People do not stay consistent. Um, and there are always going to be unforeseen circumstances that can arise and can change the dynamics of a relationship and make something that was very promising and seemed very stable no longer suitable. And I really don't judge anyone who is getting divorced because, like I said, I think it is better to get divorced than to stay in a marriage that is making you miserable and that is possibly even dangerous. Okay, now I can talk about resources. Okay, so I think an unfortunate thing is that um, this is not really an area of law, like matrimonial contracts is not an area of law where there's a lot of self-help. Like I said, there are websites that offer to draft a prenup for like I've seen rates as low as like $300. Um, but particularly because we are in Louisiana, I wouldn't really recommend that. I would say at a minimum, have an attorney review the contract that you have drafted just to make sure that I see documents drafted online where the legal terms of art, the words that they are using have absolutely no place in Louisiana law. Um, and um, Prenups in Louisiana also need to be executed in front of a notary and two witnesses, which I'm not saying that these forms do have that, but it's not a contract that you can just sign and it'll be upheld. But that being said, there are resources online if you're just kind of wanting to do a little bit more research on your own. There's always the Louisiana Legal Navigator, and which provides really helpful information about a lot of areas of Louisiana family law. And then there's also the direct source, which is legis.la.gov, which I spend a lot of time on because it has all of the Louisiana laws on there. It's great. You used to have to buy a code and then your code would get out of date and then you'd have to buy another one. And these codes were expensive. And now you can just use the website, which is very convenient. So if you're if you're really wanting to do a deep dive into the Louisiana Civil Code and the statutes about community property, that is a great source. Okay. Yeah. Do we have any questions? If not, I can probably ramble about
Yeah, so we're
divorce for another 10 minutes at least.
we can go ahead and open it up for questions. Again, if anyone watching this on Facebook has any questions, you can feel free to enter them into the comments section. And if you're watching this on Zoom, please enter any questions in the Q&A section, or the comments, or chat. We'll find them there. We don't have any questions yet, but I know there's a little bit of a delay on Facebook. So while we wait for questions, I just want to highlight some additional resources. Camille touched on some of them already, but these might be helpful if you have a legal question that was not addressed during the presentation today, or if you need help getting legal assistance. So this flyer is our Louisiana State Bar Association's Fine Legal Help Flyer, and it's where you can access a continuum of services. It includes our attorney directory, the Civil Legal Navigator, which Camille mentioned, legal aid and pro bono organizations, the Modest Means Directory, which is if you make too much to afford free legal services but not enough to pay for them. These attorneys in this directory have agreed to offer low-cost legal services. So you can search them in that directory either by location or by legal area, legal topic, if you qualify to access the directory. And then there's also some self-help services, court forms. We do have a couple of divorce forms located on our self-help website. However, I will note, or do want to note, that these are for, as Camille was talking about, uncontested divorces. These are for simple divorces. And the gold standard, it honestly is always getting an attorney. I would like to call special attention to the Louisiana Civil Legal Navigator. It is a great sort of diagnostic tool that helps you identify your legal issue, and it will provide customized legal information, referrals to legal aid in your area, and more. And so it will give you, it's simple to use, and it will give you the next steps specific to your issue and or in your parish or location. And then the other resource that I'd like to point out is Free Legal Answers. This is an online pro bono program where users that qualify to use the program, there is an income eligibility requirement. So if you qualify to use it, you can log in whenever, wherever you like, and ask your civil legal question um, through this website. It's kind of like an email exchange on the Free Legal Answers website platform. And then we have volunteer attorneys that log in and they may answer your question. It is private and as I mentioned, users must meet certain income guidelines to use it, but it is a great resource if you need it. Now, that's that for the additional resources. Wait, let's go back to questions. I'm going to take this down. I think we have some actually.
Great. I see one from Joshua Smith.
Yes, I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud just in case others might have a similar one. If you marry your significant other and he already purchased his house prior to your marriage and then you eventually get divorced, if you don't have title to the house, how would this stand in the court of law in Louisiana? Would you be reimbursed for said payments, i.e., helping pay monthly mortgage payments but not having title ownership?
Um, so the under community property, you would have a reimbursement claim for 50% of what you paid towards the mortgage. Because only 50%, if you're doing it from community property, like you guys are in a community property regime and you're paying the mortgage with the money that you're both earning. So like 50% of what you paid is his property anyway, but also 50% of what he's paying is his property. Um, so yes, you do have, technically speaking, a mortgage reimbursement claim for half of the payments towards his mortgage on his separate property. I have heard people make the argument that, well, you were paying rent essentially, but I am not familiar with any black letter law like in the civil code that actually says that. I think that you have a mortgage reimbursement for half of the payments made towards his mortgage during your marriage because that's not only his separate house, it's his separate debt.
Great question. I don't see any others that are coming through quite yet. I'm going to give it a second for Emily to check Facebook and see if we've got any questions there. And in the meantime, yeah, the questions there. Okay. So, I think that will conclude for today. I do want to go over some upcoming law talks that we have. So please save the date for our next law talks. It will be on March 18th at noon. It will be on expungements. And then after that, we have about one each month at various different dates and times that are listed here. You can also get more information about our law talks at www.louisianalawyersanlibraries.org. You can actually access to register either to participate by Zoom or get the Facebook link directly there at that website. But that concludes everything. Camille, thank you so much for presenting on this important and useful information. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great evening.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.